Welcome to my train of thought. Today we're going to be going over why this podcast and a couple other different things, I'm sure. This is actually the second time I'm recording this episode. The first one had some audio issues, and now we're going to be, going over essentially everything I talked about, but maybe that'll make it more concise. We'll see. Anyway, we'll get into it after the jingle.
All aboard!
Cool. Welcome, guys. Well, I want to say first off, thank you for everyone listening. I know it's probably just the two people that I'll be talking about in this episode, but essentially, I want to break down kind of why I'm making this podcast. The idea for this being the topic actually comes from me talking to somebody on. Oh, I dropped some. Oh no, 1 second. I'm not cutting any of this out. See, the idea for this topic actually comes from me talking to somebody on Instagram. We've been talking for, I think, a week or two. And they're actually really nice. I really like them. But I told them I was making a project just to spite my friend. And they were like, "Oh, what project? What project?" And I honestly tried typing out why like 10 different times, and there's no good way to explain this without making a 20-minute podcast about it or talking to them in person. There's no way I could write this out over text. I don't know. Maybe you could ask, ChatGPT to summarize it, but I certainly can't contain all the pertinent points in like something less than a paragraph. But essentially, there's a couple different things that went into this podcast. 1 second here. Oh, there we go. One of the main things is my friend Clay. Let me bring the mic a little closer. My friend Clay. So Clay is one of my dearest friends who I've known for about, I think it's 3 years now. He met my friend Ian in college. They went to UC here in California, and they became friends. And then at one point, Ian made a D&D game. He was running a D&D game, and Clay and I were players in it. And that's how I met Clay. And at one point, Clay actually became my roommate, and he was my roommate for about, it wasn't 2 years, but it was like 1.5 years, I believe, maybe a little longer. And so Clay and I have known each other for a while now. And I view Clay as kind of like a big brother to me. He's always got good advice. He's helped me change my perspectives on a lot of things. And, we've gone through a lot of emotional stuff together. I'm sure I'll have a podcast episode about, my life and my feelings and stuff. But currently, I won't. So Clay and I have known each other for a while, and when we lived together, Clay and I used to do all sorts of stuff together. We'd work on little projects. We'd go hang out all the time. And over time, Clay actually started getting into making board games and stuff, and which I think is really cool. And after some time, he moved out with his girlfriend, Julia, who is a great person. And they're both, very happy living together. I'm really excited for them. I think they've actually, as of today, been moved out a year. So congratulations, Clay. I'm sure you're listening. Hopefully you are. If you're not, you're a bad follower and listener, but you're still a good friend. So Clay and I kind of stopped hanging out as much, obviously, right? You know, when you live with somebody, you get to hang out literally every day if you want. But Clay and I, we still hung out quite a bit, but a lot of the projects we had kind of got put on hold. There was one in particular called Wizard War. Now that's just a working title, but we used to work on this a lot together, and then Clay stopped kind of working on it, and then started working on it by himself, which like didn't actually hurt my feelings, but I wanted to tease him about like, hey, why are you working on this without me? And there were a couple other things that kind of happened with Clay would talk to me about like, oh, we should do something together. We should do this project, and then Clay would kind of like work on it on his own, which is totally valid. But I wanted to harass him about it, so I started this narrative that Clay doesn't like to do things with me, and it's like I'm trying like I'm not actually gaslighting him, but it's like I keep saying this around him, so he has to like argue. It's the same. I have this dialogue with a couple of my friends where we both just like say something that isn't necessarily like true, and we all know it's true, but like someone has to respond to it. So they're like, okay, no, I do like hanging out with you. I do things with you. And then I'm like, well, what was the last thing you did with me as we're hanging out? Stuff like that. Just like stupid, silly shit. But Clay did kind of start this theme of doing stuff without me. And I feel like if we had been living together, he would have done them with me. But does that make me a friend of circumstance or an actual friend? That's for you, the viewer, to the listener, to decide. Anyway, so over time, I just kept like making these jokes on occasion. I wasn't like harassing him with them, unless we were hanging out in person. And one time, he decided he's going to make a podcast. He was going to make a podcast, like a TTRPG podcast, and it was gonna, cover. He and a group were gonna all, they're playing, and I think Clay was the DM, and they were just gonna record it, like fun little thing, like kind of like Critical Role if you're familiar. And I mentioned Critical Role in my first podcast episode, so if you want to hear, the first podcast episode is honestly so terrible. I just was rambling. I mean, I'm rambling now, but that was even worse. But anyway, so he wanted to make this podcast. And he didn't invite me, the bastard. He invited Ian, my friend of 14 years, his friend of that point of 3 or 4. Okay, no, he invited my friend Ian, and Ian was actually not in state. He was gonna do it virtually. I don't know exactly how that was gonna work. But that was their plan, and it didn't end up working out. I think Clay had somebody drop out the day before they were supposed to, play, and then, I think there was some audio issue. I don't remember exactly, but it just didn't pan out, and that's how some things happened. But before he actually filmed it, because he told me he was making one, I was, making my jokes of like, wow, of course you wouldn't invite me. And I was like, I'm going to make my own podcast, and my podcast will get so popular, I'll rep your podcast to help you guys out, help the little guy out. And so I, or like, I'm going to make a podcast reviewing every episode of your podcast and talking about how it would be better if I was on it. Some stupid shit like that, where, I'm like attaching myself to this project, but in a way that's not, like actually, I didn't actually make any this is not this podcast. But that was there was this long running joke where I was gonna make a podcast just to spite Clay in a way, or like it was gonna be like a rivalry podcast. Like this was my chance to have a rivalry with Clay. Um, it didn't. Neither of ours panned out. That was months ago. That was like 6 months ago or something. And so nothing actually came of that. But I went to Mexico. I went to a whole bunch of stuff. There was actually one of the topics I was thinking about, like, because I went through it because I never actually actioned on it. I went through a couple different like ideas for what the topic of the podcast could be. Like maybe I'll have guests on or something. One of my ideas was this guy Moses. Um, so one day I got like messaged by this, completely obvious bot account that had some pictures of a lady on it. Like, you can just tell. And then, this, yeah, I let me see if I can pull up. No, it's too much work. Um, this bot account was like, oh, I, I like you. You're so hot and sexy. We should meet up. Where do you live? And I was like giving very general information because I just wanted to tease out any information I can give to this person. Because I knew it was a fake account. And so eventually, they're like, wow, we need to meet up and I need to have sex. But no, we can't let anybody know because of, and they've listed a bunch of random bullshit. And I was like, okay, we should do a video call first. No, I don't do video calls, honey. I want to do a video. Can we do a phone call? No, we can't. I'm like, I'm not. I'll pay. I'll pay for you to like, They were like asking for money and shit. And I was like, I can pay. I can pay, but you have to do a phone call with me. You have to do a video call with me. Just trying to egg on this scammer. And eventually, I got him to phone call me. And, there was no actual audio on the other end. And they're like, oh, sorry, my audio isn't working. And I'm like, video call me. I wanna see you in person. And so they would eventually I harassed them enough. They started video calling, like a video call with me, and they held their camera up to another screen. And you can see the pixels and all that sort of shit, like warping with the camera perspective. And it's like this, woman getting ready in a mirror, and then it was like 5 seconds, and then they turned it off, and they're like, "See, that proves it was me." And I'm like, "I know you're a scammer. Like, I know you're a scammer." And they're like, "Oh, they weren't messaging," and I'm like, "Come on, just video call me. I know you're a scammer. You might as well show me who you really are. Let's talk face to face." And so after a little bit of prodding, they actually did. And I learned a lot about this guy. So his name is Moses. He lives in Africa. I don't remember the country. He was going to school at the time. He was pretty young. I think he was under 18. He was like 17 or something. Or maybe he was 19. I don't remember. He was around that age. And he was scamming people. That was his way to get money. And I was talking to him like, you're in school. You're in a trade school. You're like learning how to, repair phones and fix circuit boards and stuff. Like he showed me his little, like he had a soldering iron and he had like a whole bunch of stuff, and he was showing me his room, and I'm like, you're a cool guy, because I actually started video calling him a couple times, and I'm like, you're a nice guy. Like, why are you scamming? Like that's, and he told me it's because life is hard out there, and stuff is expensive, food is expensive. And, you could get into a whole discussion about the morality and ethics behind all that sort of stuff, but it's to a degree it's understandable, but also no. Eventually, I had to old yeller him because he tried to scam me again. While I knew it was some sort of like, I'll give you Bitcoin if you know, if you Venmo me X amount of money, and I'll even send you the Bitcoin first. And it's like, he was probably scamming some old lady or old man, whatever, he got cash out of him and then wanted to convert that into, oh no, he wanted me to accept, this is what it was. He wanted me to accept cash apps from people and then send him Bitcoin. And he was like, no, that's totally legitimate. And I'm like, that's totally not legitimate. And so I had to take him out back and ban him, or, block him. It's unfortunate. He seemed like a nice kid. I hope he's doing okay. I hope he's not scamming anymore. But, so I had to do it. But, essentially that was one of the ideas for the podcast back in the day. And Clay had this habit of kind of starting these projects without me. At one point I paid this, it was such a running joke at that point that I paid a YouTuber $40 to make a cameo about, hold on, I just got a message on Instagram. Okay. Hold on. I'm going to pause the recording really quick. Sorry. Where was I? Oh yeah, so I paid this YouTube creator, Dan Henschel, to make a video harassing and yelling at Clay for not doing stuff with me. It was very, it was all well received. It was funny. I'll put the video in here. If you're listening, you may want to tab back into the video to watch it. Anyway, here it is.
Hi, Clay. Fuck you. You need to do stuff with Justin. He is your friend, and he cares about you. So stop starting projects together and then just working on it by yourself or not doing it at all. You're an inconsiderate prick who doesn't care about his friends. And you know what? I'm gonna kill you!
And, yeah, so, it's just this running joke. And, months pass. I went to Mexico. A bunch of stuff happened. Life happened. And Ian, who was living out of state for the last podcast, actually moved back. And Clay and Ian decided to start a podcast about California history while I was in Mexico. And when I came back, I found out about this. And I thought it was fucking hilarious because now I could do the same thing. So that's actually the reason for this podcast. Within an hour and a half of Clay telling me he was doing another podcast, I decided to record the first episode, which, as you can tell, it was only 10 minutes, and I had to figure out, a bunch of shit. I had to make a little thumbnail, but I made my own podcast just to combat his, and now we're actually, so Clay, Ian, and I are thinking about doing a podcast together now because, I was making jokes like, well, if you ask me, I'm a real podcaster. I know you guys are still in prep for yours, but I've published a podcast before, that sort of shit. And we were joking around, and we decided that we were going to make a podcast about world building for TTRPGs or whatever, right? Like, let's say you want a book and you want to, you know, where every episode is essentially going to be a new world. And for those of you who don't really understand that, essentially, in D&D and Pathfinder or whatever or for books, a big part of establishing a world is taking the time to build that world, having some unique things that make your world different. Whether it is like a system of magic, or like for Lord of the Rings, it's like you go, is it soft magic or hard magic? What are some things in that world that make it unique? You can talk about how there's this evil force known as, this thing is Saruman. Saruman? How am I forget? It's fucking Lord of the Rings. Yeah, Saruman. Or Saruman Sauron. God, they're all the fucking same. Saruman's a wizard guy. Sauron and it's like like, oh, what are the elves like? What are the races like in the world? What's the actual physical world like? That sort of stuff. So, I've had plenty of talks with Ian and Clay independently about cool ideas for worlds, because we're all into D&D, and that's like a really good world building outlet. And I think that if we made a little podcast, it would be a lot of fun. So it'll be different, but it'll be fun. I don't know. But this podcast is literally just me ranting and rambling. And I don't expect to get any sort of following from this. I don't even really want. Oh, I got a phone call. 1 second. Let me pause this. Sorry about that. I had a phone call. I actually don't remember what I was talking about because it was long ago. Probably something to do with like the new podcast. Oh yeah, I think it was the world building. Anyway, I care about my friends Clay and Ian a lot. I'm excited to do that little project with them, and I actually do wish them the best on their California history podcast, and we'll of course be repping that with all my 7 viewers, making sure that they can go to that podcast. So anyway, I appreciate all you guys' time, and I hope that you have a great day, and I hope you listen to me again soon. Take care. This train is leaving the station. Choo-choo.